Hello and welcome back to my interview with Connor Vanecek, the chairman of the Hutto Baha'i Group, talking about the Baha'i faith. Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Oh, of course, my pleasure. So last time we covered the founding and the, at least early history of the faith. This time I want to focus on sort of the teachings as much as possible. I understand there's a lot of them, so we can't read through literally either in the original Arabic or in an English translation. But my understanding is that there are 12 basic principles that sort of form the foundation, or they're the most important parts of the faith.
Right. And these were specifically written down as the 12 basic principles by Abdul-Baha, the son of the founder, who was left in charge. And just got them right here.
Okay.
Just go ahead and start.
Oh, yeah. Pick your favorite, or whichever, or if they actually come in a specific order.
Oh, yeah, there's an order to them.
Okay.
All right, so we got here. The first basic principle is the oneness of the world of humanity. And for each one of these, Abdul-Baha gives like a description, like they're like certain gemstones, like just as an analogy.
Okay, when you say certain, sorry, let me cut you off right at the beginning. When you say certain gemstones, you mean that
He uses the stones as an analogy.
Okay. So there's then 12 gemstones, and each one is a explanation.
The like the coloring of them, like they have like the way they are, like serve as the analogy. All right. So the first one on
the oneness of the world of humanity.
Yes.
Okay.
The description is, hands may be black, white, yellow, or brown, but the hue of the heart is one. The first foundation stone is the jasper. It is clear red, like the hue of the heart. In ancient times, it was called the bloodstone.
Okay, so I'm less familiar with gems in general, but if it's the oneness of humanity, it's basically like, come together right now over me, we're all the same situation? All right.
Yeah, and the most, one of the more famous quotes that I know of, which is kind of funny because I'm blanking on it right now.
Well.
All right, so I can remember the other one. It's, ye are the fruits of one tree and the leaves of one branch.
Okay. And then I believe that I asked you last time, but I don't think that there's a creation story in the Baha'i faith.
Not specifically. I mean, it kind of piggybacks off of the Genesis story from Judaism, but that's just through the, Judaism, then Christianity came out of that, and then Islam came attached to both of those. But for us, the Genesis story is more of a giant metaphor.
In the Baha'i faith, does the Genesis story, I'm a little bit biased, does the Genesis myth or creation story have a particular significance, or is it just sort of in the background there?
Yeah, it's mostly in the background as a metaphor from Judaism, but our focus with the Baha'i faith is what has been provided for us by the Bab and Baha'u'llah, because for us, in the teaching itself, that these are the teachings that were sent for today's day and age, and these are the ones we need to put more focus on without disregarding the importance that other religions from the same source played at their time and place.
Okay, that's right. I've forgotten how much, because as we've said, the Abrahamic traditions sort of come one after the other, borrow, and, two out of three think that Jesus was a pretty cool guy to some degree. I've forgotten what the relationship between the Baha'i faith and other faiths is as far as the teachings.
Well, it's not limited to Abrahamic, even though it came out of Shiite Persia in the mid-1840s. But no, it's not limited to, because we also recognize the Vedic faiths.
Okay.
Well, Krishna in particular within Hinduism and the Buddha, but even with any monotheistic spiritual faith tradition, like some from the Australasian Aboriginals definitely a lot of similarities with Native American faith traditions that have a monotheistic tone to them.
Okay. I'm largely unfamiliar with the various Native American faith traditions, though the diversity of them makes it challenging and gives me an excuse to not know them very well.
Also, they were kind of taken out a little bit, so don't really know them as they should have been.
I mean, I was going
You were trying to be...
I wasn't going to make the excuse, oh, well, colonization happened, so I don't need to learn about Native... Is not what I was...
I wasn't saying that. I'm saying, like, that's why it's so much extra difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my understanding is they're kept alive. But here, let's circle back to the first principle, which is what we were talking about, which is, the universality or the...
The oneness of mankind.
Oneness, there it is, the oneness of mankind. So... Does that have any sort of specific play, or is it more of a guiding ethos?
Both, and we'll actually get to that later on in the 12 principles. That's also included.
All right. So should we go to the second one, or is there?
Yeah, I can go to the next one. You and the atheist audience will definitely like this one.
I don't know whether that was sarcasm, so I've braced myself.
The second basic principle is the independent investigation of the truth. All must be free to seek out truth in their own way. The second foundation stone, the sapphire, is a clear blue, true blue, and the color of faith, inspiration, loyalty, and truth. Man must be free to soar in this dome of heaven's blue truth and see it with his own eyes.
I'd never heard an expression like the color of faith before, but I mean, metaphors with gemstones. So then of course, my question is, when it says to seek out their own truth, is that every faith has merit, live and let live situation, or is it more about like access to information and studies?
Both.
Okay.
And
good.
I have another piece of scripture here that goes into a little bit more deep. It's basically the same thing, but it's a little bit more wording to it.
How is scripture cited? Just as a side note, because in the Bible you cite book, chapter, verse.
We'll just say who said it.
Oh, okay. But there's not like chapter verse divisions in the teachings of the faith, or?
Well, I mean, yeah, that can definitely be added. Like this one from Abdul-Baha in his book Promulgation of Universal Peace, page 293.
Ah, okay.
And so this little segment,
regular book citations.
So this is man is not intended to see through the eyes of another, hear through another's ears, nor comprehend with another's brain. Each human creature has individual endowment, power, and responsibility in the creative plan of God. Therefore, depend upon your own reason and judgment and adhere to the outcome of your own investigation. Otherwise, you will be utterly submerged in the sea of ignorance and deprived of all the bounties of God.
Okay. So that almost, presumably, like, as you've said, though we haven't gone into specific detail, I guess the Bab isn't technically the founder of Baha'i. Correct me if optimistically I get part of this wrong, but Baha'u'llah is the founder. Abdul, his son, then was, I think, the only one who's allowed to interpret the teachings of...
He was allowed to expand on the teachings as his in his father's will directed.
Okay.
Because Abdul-Baha was described as the only, and this was described by Baha'u'llah as the only one to master his teachings.
Okay.
And the Bab, we refer to him as the forerunner of the faith.
Okay, the forerunner of the faith. All right. So I guess then my question is, if this is a principle of the faith that's not meant to see through the eyes of another, etc., the sort of attempt of teachings is to understand with the brain of another, see them, because if the teachings come from Baha'u'llah, presumably that's from the brain of another. At what point do you question, I suppose, the observations of another person, even Baha'u'llah?
Yeah, this is also specifically addressed in his teachings, where he says that we are allowed to, if we don't truly, or if we don't understand like where it's coming from, we are. It's not like a bad thing to disagree with someone just because you have a different understanding.
Okay.
And so there is a lot of leeway, like, because in the faith it's described that everyone is on their own path for truth, and that everyone moves at their own pace.
Okay. Well, so the only reason that I say this is I have a basic understanding of how this would apply to, learning about things outside the faith is, there isn't a specific doctrine that's applied, unlike sort of more evangelical or stricter types of Christianity where it's actually, let me tell you about what the official stance of this church is on video games, right? Like that isn't a thing. But in terms of the actual teachings of the faith, how does disagreeing with the teachings or disagreeing with Abdul's, I've been using the word interpretation, my understanding is that's wrong, expansion of that, right? So if you disagree with something that's a conclusion of the teachings of the faith, how does that
There's
play out?
nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
I mean, with how many, there's always going to be people who don't necessarily agree 100% with everything. But there's also an interesting thing that I was really hoping to bring up.
Okay.
And so it was Shoghi Effendi, who's referred to as the guardian of the faith, Abdul-Baha's grandson. And he was the only one given official interpretation, and he was the last one given it. Like, not even the current head of the faith, the Universal House of Justice, made up of 9 people. They don't even have the right to make official interpretations, or like they are even banned from making spiritual rulings or giving statements on stuff that is not expressly mentioned in the scriptures.
Okay. So
Real quick, the quote from Shoghi Effendi was, religious truth is relative, not absolute.
Okay. Can you, presumably there's some expansion of what he meant by that, or can you?
I don't have it on here at the moment, but it was more of a reference, it was more of a way to say that a lot of the focus of the faith is to avoid a staunch, dogmatic view of the faith itself.
I definitely get that impression.
Because I think we mentioned this we talked about this in the last interview, that, once you start getting dogmatism and start taking hard lines, then it starts cutting through everything, and it causes hatred and animosity. And it's not something we want. And we view the value of unity in diversity, and diversity in every aspect.
Okay. So, I mean, part of what I'm getting at is presumably there's a limit. Like what you referred to with the Universal House of Justice is that they don't have the right to expand on official
of what is already available.
Of what is already available. So, are they allowed to promulgate unofficial sort of opinions on stuff, or?
What comes to mind is I think it was in a letter to a believer in 1983 where the House of Justice was actually asked about transgender people. And their response was, well, like they said, they can't make there's no faith-based aspect to it because it's not mentioned. So they go in the letter. They go into how it's solely just a medical decision, and they talk about how there are individuals who are born with both sexes, and they can choose later in life which one they want to be. And so, for someone who says they identify as one gender over another, then that person must be treated in that regard, and their decision must be respected.
Okay, I mean, sounds good to me. So is there a specific name for that? Because it's not mentioned, so that's not an official, teaching of the faith. However, if it comes from the Universal House of Justice.
Well, they specifically say that it's not a spiritual thing, especially since it's entirely about the material aspect of a person.
Yeah.
So it's not really that much of an importance to to the spiritual life.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, to clarify, a person's mind and their thoughts, how much does that fall within the realm of the spiritual aspect of a person? According to the Baha'i faith, obviously. Difficult question, but yeah. I mean, I haven't given you a specific example, so it's difficult to address. So, like when a person is, studying the teachings of the faith, et cetera, they're using their mind, which is presumably a material aspect of the person.
All right. Well, the material body is only a vehicle for the spirit and the soul to maneuver through this world, and so it's a way to, in this existence, to interact and communicate with others.
Okay. I was going to say with, like, the beyond or others. But so, as a quick side note, you say the spirit and the soul. Are those strictly distinct things, or?
Yeah, in the teachings, it does describe that the mind, the soul, and the spirit are three distinct aspects.
Huh.
So the mind is more of the material aspect, and the soul is what we believe to be what continues on in the next life. And with an in-depth reading of Scripture, you'll come to see that when it talks about the spirit and spirituality, it's referring to virtues. Like what's referred to as spiritual emotions is just a list of virtues that, as we described in the last interview, are basically humanist virtues.
Okay, so, kindness, valuing human life, believing in the oneness of the human world. Okay, I think that makes sense. But then it seems like the spirit could be described as a specific sort of. I've already used the word ethos, but it works here very well. A certain ethos or ethic, as far as the way that one makes decisions about things to do in life. Okay, because that in my mind, starts to bump up against like what I would consider part of the mind. So is there like a solid distinction between the mind and the spirit, or like is there a more fine line, or like a more bold line, the opposite of fine, between the spirit and the mind, or?
The mind is just described as the material aspect of the same thing. Like we were discussing in the last interview, there's a whole lot of dualistic aspects in the teachings of the faith. So, like, the mind and the soul are like two different aspects of the same thing.
Okay, yeah, because as you mentioned, the soul carries on, right? But presumably it doesn't leave your mind and your spirit behind.
Right. No, the spirit continues on with it as well.
Okay. So does the soul have specific attributes then, or is it just sort of? It's specifically stated in the teachings that as long as we exist in this world, we're never going to know, because you can't measure it with material aspects. Okay. I have to say, just from my perspective, it's refreshing to hear a religion say, you know what, we don't know everything. Yeah. It is sort of, so the last question I'll ask about this before we go back to the principles, et cetera, unless we go down another rabbit hole, is the Universal House of Justice in a letter to a believer in, I think you said 1980...
83, I believe.
Yeah. Oh, well, if you're wrong, then clearly the Universal House of Justice is going to burn you at the stake. My understanding of the Baha'i faith is it would be somewhat contradictory to the principles there, but if, further down the line, the Universal House of Justice in 1995 answers a question from a believer about people that are transgender in a different way, would that be?
I am not familiar with that.
No. Like, not that it has happened. Certainly, I don't know that it has happened, and am much less familiar with the actions of the Universal House of Justice and the scriptures than you are. But has that ever happened, like the conflict of...
Not to my knowledge. I mean, usually they have immediate access to all the source material, and so they have even stuff that hasn't been officially released, because they got to translate stuff into they like have to literally translate it perfectly into over 800 languages.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to like release something.
Yeah.
You just got to get that right so no one makes an accidental mistake.
You gotta translate it and check the translation and get a second person, presumably. Because once you start translating through multiple languages, you can really, you start talking about virgins instead of young women. Zing. No, so...
Or in Islam, where it wasn't 72 virgins, it was 72 figs.
That's where, although I've never officially read the Quran because it's only counts as the Quran when it's in Arabic. Although I'm not sure that actually is universal amongst all the... We're not here to try and delve into Islam, given that neither of us is a Muslim or ex-Muslim. But, so my question is, because in the Baha'i faith, it sounds like there are differing opinions, and that's encouraged, right? Mm-hmm. Unity and diversity of all kinds. So if, whichever people are on the universal... In the Universal House of Justice?
It's kind of like just like a group of 9 individuals who have been elected.
Okay. Elected to the Universal House of Justice. Has a slightly different take, obviously not on the official doctrines, but on, the letter to a believer. Would they not express that opinion, or might they express that opinion to correct like a previous thing if they viewed it as a mistake? It doesn't have to be that specific example, but presumably that's not literally the only time the Universal House of Justice has written a letter.
Right.
Right.
I don't know of corrections as we're referring to them. What I do know is that they okay, first off, before going into this, got to make there's supposed to be infallible, but you got to go into the second definition of that word, where it means to be as correct as possible.
Right.
And so they are required to speak as one body.
Right.
Like, we can't even know, like, who, like, if they vote on something, like, oh, what was the vote tally? Yeah. Like, well, we can't say that.
Yeah, like the Universal House of Justice has one voice when it speaks.
Right.
Okay.
And so...
to be clear, just to clarify, when you say infallible, meaning as correct as you can be, you're referring to the Universal House of Justice?
Yes.
Okay.
They basically have to... talks and they have to go into extensive detail in their conversation, and like the decision that they arrive at, they have to basically any official statement they give, they have to like do some of the most thorough investigation throughout the scripture that they have available to them.
Okay, so it is then based on a reading and an understanding, not an interpretation, an understanding of the scripture and of the teachings of the faith, because it presumably includes. I've just.
And then they have to agree on it.
And then they have to agree on it. All right. And then if it's the vote or whatever process, I don't know whether.
I haven't been in this, so I don't know.
Yeah. Do you know whether? Yeah. Well, I guess no, because the proceedings are not public. So, however conclusions are drawn, we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I suppose that makes it easier to avoid like factionalism and division and schisms.
Right. That's the most important thing to us.
Mm-hmm. Unity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that somewhat clarifies parts of it, but I guess maybe we'll address that in our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 9th.
All the way through the 12th.
All the way through the 12th interview. No. So here, let's circle back around to the 12 basic principles. Mm-hmm. We've gone down enough rabbit holes. Let's return home.
All right. The 3rd basic principle is the foundation of all religions is one.
Okay.
Each revelator has given the same new heaven and earth, but man has polluted and misrepresented these divine laws. In reality, they are all one. The third foundation stone, the chalcedony, is pure white, of which Abdul-Baha said, while white is apparent, yet in it is hidden and concealed the 7 colors. In white, all colors are brothers and sisters. White is the symbol of purity, and in its origin, each religion is pure, and a brother to every other religion, for all truth is one. And so just to make sure it's clear to anyone watching this, it's the foundation, like where they originate, the spiritual principles, like we discussed in the last interview, have remained the same. It's just the material aspects of the religions that change with each one.
Okay, so I think I understand that, it's not trying to claim that actually all of the doctrines of all of the religions can work together, because if you read it, even just a handful, you know that they contradict. You can't have one God and multiple gods.
If you're referring back to Hinduism, even 80% of Hindus consider that to be a monotheistic religion.
I mean, that's true through Brahman, but I mean, you can put, I think almost every, well, there's tens of thousands. You can put Christianity next to Hinduism, and they can't. At least Christianity
line up
can't
perfectly
go,
in their current forms.
Actually, Vishnu, Christian now.
Like that was also like how you just said. Like that was also referenced in this, where it says man has polluted and misrepresented these divine laws.
Okay, so it's sort of hinting at what I might refer to as the human origins of religions, and I think that I can see some merit in that position, although I don't know that I would go as far as saying all religions. And I don't know whether that sort of takes into account, more modern things that call themselves religions, like, I've just forgotten the name of, it's one of the alien-based religions where it's...
Scientology?
That as well, but there's one that...
I think I know which one you're talking about.
Pick up.
It originated in like Australia or something.
Maybe.
Is it the?
There's
thinking of
quite a few religions, but there's more.
I'm thinking of the one where the symbol is the Star of David, but with a swastika in the middle of it.
That's the one I'm thinking of, right? So I mean, certainly you're saying the teachings say that the material aspects have changed, but the foundation is the same, right? So things like Shintoism or sort of regional or like, I don't want to say clan-based, but clan-based sort of local gods, is it including those, or does it mean like primarily the sort of major religions like, the Abrahamic tradition and these sorts of things?
Well, those are the ones where the founders of those religions are named as having been sent by God, but you can't just denounce a faith just because it's not specifically mentioned. Like,
okay,
it can have some truth in it that you can derive a more spiritual aspect of living from.
Okay, do the teachings mention specifically any religions, or?
Just the Abrahamic faiths and the Vedic faith and Zoroastrianism.
Okay, but they don't mention like the sort of Shintoism, or I don't know how you classify like traditions of ancestor worship in China, etc. Right? Because those are Confucianism is more
a philosophy.
Yeah, more a philosophy than a religion, I would say, because it doesn't make the metaphysical claims. It just talks about obligations more, which is actually a lot of what I seem to hear the same type of thing in the Baha'i faith, though expressed in principles rather than obligations.
Right. There's almost like to avoid rituals. Like basically, rituals are virtually just banned.
Oh, in Baha'i?
Because rituals lead to we should do it this way. No, we should do it that way. There goes the split.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I I have a guess at the answer, but for example, Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays or Christmas, and that's based on the aspects of the rituals. Is there an official Baha'i stance on rituals of that kind?
It's just that we personally are not supposed to. You're just talking about like celebrating birthdays or other holidays?
Yeah, is there a prohibition on members of the Baha'i faith from participating in rituals, like of other kinds? You know? Can you?
The best way I can describe this, like given the examples you gave, is there's no problem with birthdays, and if you go to Christmas celebration, there's still plenty of us in this country that come from Christian families.
Okay.
And there's nothing against joining your family for a holiday.
All right. But it's just not an official tradition of the Baha'i faith.
Right.
Okay. It's interesting. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I mean that kind of covers it. I was looking for a rabbit hole desperately. Well, cool. I mean,
almost had it.
if you're ready, if you've explained that one, we can, I think, touch on the next principle.
Okay. The fourth basic Baha'i principle is religion must be a source of unity. If it is not, its non-being were better than its being. The fourth foundation stone, the emerald, is green. Green is the color of harmony and unity. There is no color known that green will not harmonize with, as the green foliage blends with every hued flower. It is the color of immortality and also of humility. So essentially, religion should basically promote the unity and welfare of humanity above all else.
Okay.
And I do believe I have another. Okay. Yeah, this is also by Abdul Baha, The Purpose of Religion. Religion should unite all hearts and cause wars and disputes to vanish from the face of the earth, give birth to spirituality, and bring life and light to each heart. If religion becomes a cause of dislike, hatred, and division, it were better to be without it, and to withdraw from a religion would be a truly religious act. For it is clear that the purpose of a remedy is to cure, but if the remedy should only aggravate the complaint, it had better be left alone. Any religion which is not a cause of love and unity is no religion.
Okay.
So we got no problem with atheists.
Yeah. In fact, the act of withdrawing from religion is truly a religious act. So I had never heard that phrase that way, and will certainly be thinking about that for some time. That's probably not the way that I would describe it. However, we're not here for how I would describe things. It's interesting because the previous principle is about, specifically sort of respecting faiths and or at least it sounds that way. The pointing to the universal, like single source of all sort of religions that have been corrupted by material aspects, and then the fourth one is this is what the purpose of true religions is. So when a religion comes around that doesn't qualify as a true religion under that causes divisiveness and wars, etc.
Well, it doesn't have to. All right, so I know there's like some coloration to Christianity, especially in this country, whereas it's the more vocal, basically people with the megaphones that we see, they're the ones that I guess it would be, some of them it would be referencing, but like, okay, so I don't know if we went over this in the last interview, but the community I grew up in, the city of Taylor, just clarify, the right outside of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely an evangelical community, but in the other direction, where it focuses more on the Gospels and love thy neighbor and to treat others as you would like to be treated, that aspect. And like, even though there were different sects, and it was still the greater community has to come together to like it's like interfaith groups, like
Okay.
up in Taylor, like the main thing that the interfaith organization does up there is the food pantry, Shepherd's Heart, and it's not limited to just Christian. It's not just limited to Christian churches being a part of it.
Right.
So,
But I'm glad that the Taylor, the community, recognizes that anyone can stack cans of food on the shelf and open and distribute them. But so my question is, that's an example of when a religion that's not Baha'i, excuse me, a religion that's not Baha'i sort of qualifies under that definition of a true religion. But referring to, as you said, the people with the megaphone, right, where it doesn't sort of qualify, right? There's lots of religions that preach, this is the only way, everything else is of the devil or of other, not to pick on Christianity, it's just the group that I know the best. How does the Baha'i faith respond to or comment on that, other than the statement we've just read?
we are taught to respond to hatred with love.
Okay.
And a personal example I can give, when I was still in high school, still years before finding out about the faith, there was a certain, I'll just say, televangelist I used to watch, before going to church on Sundays. And, it kind of lasted for I don't know, no more than a year of me watching this televangelist. But the reason why I had to stop watching, because it just didn't feel right to every week tune in to someone who I felt was, their rhetoric was so homophobic.
Okay. I mean, you needn't be nervous. I'm not going to take offense at some
I know.
thing
It's just
you used to watch. Okay. Well, so that's sort of a perfect example. So the quote that you read would classify that as it didn't use the phrase "not a true religion," but I think it said "no religion at all." So, how does respond? You're taught to respond to things like that with love. And as you mentioned in the previous interview, proselytizing is discouraged, or I suppose banned, because, unity and diversity in all things. So the example of a religion that is no religion at all is a type of diversity of thought. So
wait.
So a person that believes, that has, views about the GSRM community, that says a person that has preachings, with a Bible, and they're thumping it and they're talking about how, gay people aren't going to go to heaven or whatever it is. I mean, that is another view of the Bible and Christian teaching. And if the Baha'i faith values a diversity of opinion and responds to these things with love, presumably it doesn't.
Well, we're not gonna verbally attack a person.
Well, that I understood, whether it was a disagreement about something like that, or how to properly celebrate Christmas. I wasn't misinterpreting that. I was just sort of wondering, whether you were aware of any sort of question that I suppose had been offered to the Universal House of Justice, or et cetera, because you can say, the principles of Christianity, we're going to point to love thy neighbor, I suppose as the sort of thing from Christianity that works and is good. But in terms of other aspects of that faith, they refer to spiritual things in the afterlife, but in a way that doesn't mesh with the sort of humanist Baha'i, go humans, we're all one, way of viewing the world and the way we should interact. So I guess now I'm sort of sidling into.
All right, I think we're kind of throwing a few different things together.
Yeah, let me see if I can distinguish this. So in terms of the sort of practices that are encouraged, right? Respond to hate with love, etc. So divisive preaching in any religion can split families or friend groups, and change these things. So to respond to that in love would be like to
It doesn't
accept
mean
that,
you
or-
accept it. It just means the way you engage with the person.
Okay, but you would then it would be
You can still disagree with the person, like something at that level, like it would kind of be expected to disagree with them, especially if you're a member of the faith.
Yeah. Okay. So at any point does the Baha'i faith sort of address what, if any, actions need to be taken, right? Like, so, there's a divisive, I'm trying to avoid the phrase hate preacher, but a person who's preaching things that are divisive or spiteful, presumably you would, engaging with that person is...
Okay, I think so...
what do you do,
The most likely thing is it's definitely going to be reported to the local spiritual assembly, and then like stuff can be told to them in confidence. It's not going to be repeated, and then they will then have the obligation to bring in the person, talk with them, and figure out what exactly is going on. Like maybe however that local assembly wants to address the issue.
Okay.
So it kind of becomes their responsibility to address it in private.
Okay. And that's if the person is a member of the faith or just in general?
I've heard that, under the example you've already given, it would definitely be someone in the faith. But I have heard that they do offer their services to non-members, it's kind of like it would be more like a kind of like conflict resolution kind of thing.
Okay, I mean that I can understand. I'm imagining a situation in which a divisive evangelical, in the sense of I always butcher the organization. It's like the Evangelical Association of America, but it's like EAN or A. It's one of those that has like biblical literalism and, is not too fond of anyone that's gay, for example. Something tells me that a person that is preaching those principles is less likely to respond to, I guess, an invitation to the services of a local Baha'i assembly. Oh, yeah.
There kind of is like in certain regards, there's kind of like a 3-strike kind of issue with the people in the faith.
Okay.
Like, first it's just going to be the assembly. They're going to talk to you about it.
Okay.
If you keep going, they're going to take away your rights to vote and donate to the fund and hold office. Like, you can just attend stuff. Like, we won't lock the door on you.
You can show up, and that's where we would talk. Yeah. So oh, sorry.
And the third one is basically you just you're deemed a covenant breaker and excommunicated.
Okay.
And if at a later date, like, it is shown that you have changed, you can talk with coming back in.
Okay. And that would be with like I forget whether what you said it was like, is it local assemblies have councils?
The local assembly is a group of 9 people.
Oh, okay.
Who are elected to it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So the sort of message I'm getting about the way that the Baha'i faith interacts with, I suppose, the society around it is, charity, community service, improve the world around you. But when it comes to people with different views on, spiritual questions or afterlife or things like that, it's not something that is generally addressed. Like there isn't there is no equivalent to Christianity is go out and spread the word.
Not as like the whole Bible thumping thing.
Oh, okay.
Like, not like that.
I'm not likely to have a couple members of the Baha'i faith knock on my front door, for example.
Not unless you ask them to.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So in terms of like in the larger sense affecting society, or I guess voicing one's opinion in like the political sphere, that would be outside practices that members of the faith would engage in? Or
All right. I got two things to talk about. It
Okay.
addresses kind of like before your last question there, and another one for that one directly. So when in regards to people who outside of the faith, basically the example I can give is I remember reading this story about a black jazz musician who travels across the country, and he makes a point to talk with and make friends with members of the Klan. Mm-hmm. And when I last read that 2 or 3 years ago, he claimed that he had convinced 300 people to leave the Klan.
Okay.
But just by becoming their friend.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like a similar way of interacting with people in that regard.
Okay.
Like there was this here in Central Texas, what we call the Blue Bonnet Conference. You know, just Texas Blue Bonnets, all that.
Yeah.
It's just just run by Baha'is. There was one of the speakers. I forget at large what it was she was talking about, but one thing that stuck in my mind, like, the group she is the organization she's a part of, it goes around talking to influential individuals to like discuss with them issues like with the world. And she said that at some point she was asked like because people and how they react to politics and politicians.
Yeah. Talking about trying to avoid divisiveness.
Yeah. She was asked, would you sit down with Hitler and try and talk to him? And she said she thought about it and said, like, yeah, if I had the opportunity to convince him not to do that stuff, I would do it.
Yeah.
And now going into political stuff, during apartheid South Africa, I think it was a local assembly or maybe the National Assembly. Basically, it was just in South Africa, and they wanted to hold a apartheid protest. And so when they weren't sure how to go about doing it, so they asked the next higher up. I think it was a local that asked National in South Africa, and National suggested to them, maybe instead of doing an apartheid protest, do a race unity rally, because each one kind of has like a different tone and attitude and spirit to it.
Okay. So what would be certainly it's a different tone, and then do you know what they ended up doing specifically? Like
they went with the race unity rally.
Okay. But they had, a gathering place, I shouldn't say a soapbox.
Think of it more like when hippies just hand you out a flower.
Yeah. So it was, a gathering, potentially with like a speaker or two or something like that.
I don't even know when this happened. I don't think when did that South Africa have apartheid?
Through the I think mid-90s. And then
I wasn't even 10 by the time that happened, so I wouldn't know about it.
Neither was I, and admittedly, I'm less familiar with the history of South Africa than would be necessary to talk about the apartheid. Okay, so as a quick aside, the woman you were talking about, there's an organization where they go and they talk to influential or
as they do talk with politicians.
Yeah, is that a Baha'i organization, or is that something she does? I think
it might be Baha'i inspired. Like they're definitely. This was a couple years ago when she spoke at the conference.
Okay, so one way or another, she's talking about these sort of these activities.
Ways
at a Baha'i.
she goes around and discusses with politicians, and I guess it's mostly politicians, like how to she discusses with them possible ways to improve the society around them, or that they can work towards. Because it shouldn't just be limited to the faith to work on this. We need to engage with everyone to work towards the goals of improving the welfare of mankind.
That's true. So does that mean that you do have pamphlets or no?
I mean, I don't have a pamphlet on me. If a local assembly has something prepared, like, oh, here's a quick set of information on this topic, you might want to, if you want to.
Okay. But so my question is,
It'd be you picking it up yourself.
Which practices are in accord with the teachings of the faith is sort of the types of questions I'm trying to ask. Because I'm sure there's a member of the Baha'i faith that's done some stuff that's, as you just said, they could get excommunicated, that are not in accordance with the teachings of the faith, right? So then I suppose last question before we get back to the
12 principles.
We're on number 4. So let's see. But in terms of excommunication, that's there isn't like shunning, or is there?
I believe there's this what's called the Ruhi Institute, and it's basically like a study, like a set of books compiled to study one after the other. I think one of them goes into like how best to approach it, especially like when it comes to like someone in your family or a friend, like not necessarily shun them from your life,
but
they're like for someone who's just like there, they're not really going to be showing up a whole lot.
Okay.
But like I said, they are, if they have shown to have moved away from what
the faith stands for.
If they move back, from what got them excommunicated, then I think there is there might be like a way. I guess they would just have to discuss with whatever assembly they need to, like talk with them and go from there whether or not they can be let back in. So it's not a permanent thing. Okay,
so it's just a sort of like as you said,
it's more like we can't be associated with you at the moment.
Yeah. It's not we won't talk to you. It's a sort of you can't sit with us almost. And it's a reference to the movie Mean Girls.
Never saw it.
Okay. Well, then that reference is entirely lost on me. But, I think that at least, gives an answer to my question. Yeah. So what's number 5?
All right. The 5th basic principle is religion must be in accord with science and reason. Neither must deny the other. The 5th foundation stone, the sardius, is red or brown, according to the way it is held. So it is with science and religion. They are in essence one, but differ in color and manifestation. Today they are coming closer together in their realities in the minds of thinking people. And another thing to also address is that it's mentioned in the teachings that science is particularly what we use to understand the truth of the material world, whereas religion is what we use to understand the truth of the next world.
Okay. So then there's some aspect of the Baha'i faith that addresses at least the investigation of an afterlife.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I had something on science and religion, but no, not up here. Oh, yeah, we don't got a whole lot of time left.
We don't have a whole lot. So we don't have a whole lot of time left, but we, I think we might end up having a third part to this interview. But I think this 5th principle is actually sort of interesting, and it touches on some questions. As you know, the question of do faith and science work together is sort of a topic I'm much more familiar with than the general teachings of the Baha'i faith. So you said that it addresses, science is about the material world, the world that we're in now.
Right.
It did say science and reason.
Well,
my first question is, does it have any sort of suggestions, or are there quotes in the scriptures about the afterlife?
From what I can name off the top of my head, is that in the afterlife, everyone continually progresses and advances.
Okay.
Like you spiritually progress and advance. Like it's another journey.
Okay. Presumably people are spiritually progressing in this life as well.
Yeah, definitely. Like this is the it's just the precursor. Like it's also described as this world is to the soul as the womb is to a person.
Okay.
And also, it's taught that one of the reasons for these religious teachings being sent to us every new age is to prepare us for the next world, so that I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way, but without having developed your spirit, there's a sort of you're left with a sort of a spiritual handicap.
All right. So if I can extrapolate from that, it sounds as though the Baha'i faith doesn't have multiple afterlives. Certainly not something like heaven or hell from Christianity, but that it's another journey. I don't know whether there's any sort of promulgation about whether or not it also has a material aspect.
No, well, material aspect is just is a reference to this world and this existence.
So the afterlife does not have that, or
Right.
is that known? Okay, so it's just a spiritual continuation, I guess. So then the continued development, basically the Baha'i faith would say that I've fallen a little bit behind in my journey, given that I'm not developing the
No?
spirit. And then, well, no. I mean, like, that in the afterlife, because I haven't progressed or developed my spirit, I wouldn't be... I'm not sure whether... I'm definitely not going to phrase this in the way that you might, but wouldn't be as far along in my journey or path as far as progressing and developing my spirit.
No, even as an atheist, you could be far more along than someone who is a member of the faith.
Really?
It's irregardless of what you believe, as long as you are... How am I trying to put this? I mean, these are just sent down to, like, give us guidelines to personally advance in a better direction. But it doesn't exclude people who are not members of the faith. Like, they can, by themselves, come to these conclusions on their own.
Okay. But so that I understand. It's not a like in-group, out-group specific to the Baha'i. But there are people that haven't come to these conclusions about, the oneness of mankind, etc. So they would be then, as I was saying, they would have further to progress in the afterlife.
It's not that cut and dry. It's more like a complex combination, because there's definitely going to be other people in certain areas that are far more along in those areas than I am, but also I could also be further along in certain areas that they're not.
Okay.
And so it's
it's not just one thing.
right. It's not just one thing, and we're allowed to progress in our own way. But as we get into the next life, then we still have like all of eternity to continue progressing.
Okay, so there's just then the one afterlife.
Right.
Okay. As a quick aside, does the Baha'i faith have a prescription for like a before time, right? Like, do I exist in a form before I am, conceived?
No. From what I have read, it says that your soul originates with your with you. Like there's no reincarnation. Like you start out as you and continue on as you.
Yeah. I started at some point in 1992. I wasn't going to try and get into like, when does the soul, enter the body or whatever. It wasn't where I was going with that. What I was going to address is sort of, there are people that will have come to none of these sort of conclusions, and they'll be in the afterlife, and presumably at some point it's more clear in the afterlife what sort of the goal is, or they just have an eternity to try and reach these conclusions.
Well, yeah, you'll have an eternity to progress forward, but the issue with whether or not you are advanced is because heaven and hell are described as an internal state of being, with heaven being nearness to God and hell being distance. And with God being all that is good, then you are distant from all that is good. And it is described as like like you can still, if you can find your way out of it, it's a state of hopelessness and despair. But also another thing that's also mentioned in the faith is that other people can come find you and share with you the spirituality, and it's described as they share their spiritual wealth with you.
Okay. So presumably when you're talking about heaven and hell, you're talking about
An internal aspect.
An internal aspect, so that maybe not those specific words, but as an eternal aspect in the Baha'i faith, not like
within yourself.
Yeah, so you're talking about teachings of the Baha'i faith rather than teachings of Christianity.
Right.
Right. I just wanted to clarify that because I'm used to hearing heaven and hell in the context of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So if people can find you and share their wealth, does that mean that the afterlife has a sort of physical space within it?
I have no clue.
Okay.
But it is, I'm not even sure exactly what it means by distance, because it's kind of, I guess it's more like an internal nearness and distance kind of thing.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not really sure on all of that.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but is that because,
I think that's what the whole point of this interview is.
Well, yeah, that's true, but I don't want to, try and sound like I've got a gotcha question, but is that something that the faith addresses, that, that you've been focused on other aspects of it, or is that something where the faith says that's not known as far as the afterlife?
Virtually, we do not really know what the afterlife constitutes.
Okay.
Other than the very little that we have been given, or at least told, by what we have in Scripture. Okay. But as a whole, we're not going to know as long as we live in this life.
World. Yeah. So then I guess my final question for this, for part 2 of, I don't know how many yet, of this interview is there an experience of the afterlife, right? So in the Christian tradition, hell is unpleasant and heaven is super great. So far you've described the afterlife as it's within Scripture and teaching for the Baha'i faith as continuing on a spiritual journey and either attempting to close the distance between you and God, like internally. But do you feel in heaven, right? Like, I'm not asking, are you going to get set on fire and burn eternally, but is there pleasure and discomfort?
I don't know if it's in the physical. It's probably not in the physical sense of the word. Mm-hmm. What makes you you, and you can still, it still exists.
Okay.
In the next life.
Okay. And
it is described that you will still be an individual, able to make up your own mind.
Okay. Well, so I suppose if it's not physical, then, you're not going to stub your toe. Right. And experience that unpleasantness. But there are people certainly who find, I don't know, pick your favorite or least favorite thing, right? Like there's people that have a great, that admire poetry immensely. So presumably they could communicate with, or at least be enriched or experience the spiritual enrichment from, for example, a master poet in the afterlife, and that would be something that would be, pleasant or pleasurable in the afterlife. Or is that not specifically addressed in Scripture?
No, I think that's understood as, like, you can communicate with anyone else. Like, to be honest, I want to see Gandhi's fan fiction on Star Wars.
So I actually don't know when Gandhi died, but so he might not know what Star Wars is in the
plenty of dead people who know what it is that didn't tell them about it, or they just know by observing us.
Okay. So you can you observe this life from the afterlife?
I think you can.
Okay.
But you're going to be more focused on your afterlife existence.
Okay. And probably have less time to write Star Wars fan fiction then. I
don't think it's mutually exclusive. Like, even in the faith, we're told to be, like, you can be moderately religious. You don't have to go overboard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose my next question is, can you choose can you choose who you communicate with, right?
Yeah.
So you can in the afterlife, presumably, you could deliberately not communicate with a person.
I mean, I don't know exactly what it would be like to. We're really getting into something that not even the faith has a whole lot of answers on.
Okay, yeah, I mean that's sort of my curiosity is what answers does the Baha'i faith proffer about the afterlife that it says exists. But in any case, it might be that I've asked specific questions that you weren't necessarily thinking about coming up. We're running out of time for part 2. We'll presumably pick it up in part 3.
Yep.
Thank you for joining me again, Connor. Thank you for tuning in to watch wherever it is or whenever it is you watch. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for joining me. And I think that's the end of part 2.